everyone. I think Michelle has set this session up superbly for us, and Michelle is joining us again now. And we hope to have an averagely aggressive discussion. How about that? Now, let me introduce everyone from the far end there. We've got Fiona Vines. Fiona is Global Head of Inclusion and Diversity at BHP. Welcome. Then we have Sarah Goss. Sarah is Head of Innovation at Ericsson for Australia and New Zealand. Then we've got Charles O'Leary, Associate Director from, Stigville, Director of People and Culture at SBS. And Charles O'Leary, Associate Director of Murray here at the university, and Michelle, of course. Okay, I thought I might just kick off this discussion about diversity by telling you about the first thing I clicked on this morning, and that was a story about the royal family's new nuptials. Now, picture the scene. Not so very long ago, Prince Harry goes to Her Majesty and says, "Grandma, it's time for me to get married." "Lovely, Harry. Met a nice girl in Iraq, did you?" "No, not quite, Grandma. No, look, she's American." "What else, dear?" "Well, she's a divorcee." "Oh, an American divorcee. That goes down really well in the British royal family." "Yeah, she's a little bit older than me. She's 36. You can just see them doing the sums there on her reproductive cycle. Then comes the other one. "Oh, and Grandma, she's an actress. So we've got an American divorcee actress who's 36. And then comes the kicker. Grandma, I have to tell you, she's from a mixed race marriage." And this 93-year-old inheritor of a centuries-old monarchy says, "Well, that's all right, dear." So I think that suggests a little bit of change. But to your point, Michelle, I think the fit will be very interesting for her. Might have to be a bit of induction. Yeah. Let's start on this. I thought that was a very compelling argument, this question of fit. And it goes to those people who do fit in and those who don't, and we might get to that as well. Can I start, Fiona, with you? How did you relate to Michelle's argument there from where you sit in a big resource company?
Yeah, absolutely. So the mining industry is not known for having a lot of gender diversity. It's around about 18% of the mining workforce are women. So it's very difficult to see how you fit in as a woman in the mining industry. And so I completely agree with Michelle's hypothesis that women are not making choices based on their reproductive cycle. They're making choices based on the context of looking around what they see above them and around them, which is then reinforced by the external barriers, which are still there, around the societal expectations of who does the caring. And even just some of the policy settings around superannuation and parental leave, GST on feminine hygiene products. I mean, I could list them all day long around the constant reminders in our society about how women are undervalued. So I think that's why the pace of change is glacial, is because there are so many barriers for women, and it is completely not the Sheryl Sandberg fix the women approach, I think, that's going to take us forward.
Give us an idea of numbers, women in leadership roles now in BHP.
So at BHP, 30% of the executive team are women, 33% of the board are women, and we've set an aspiration to be gender balanced by 2025, which means by 2025 we want half our workforce to be women, and we're currently sitting at 21%. So it's, there's a long, long way to go. There's a lot of systemic barriers in the industry, two of which I'll talk about, and I'm sure they'll come up in detail in this conversation. One is flexible working. So flexible working is a massive enabler of women participating more fully in the workforce because it actually enables men to participate a bit less.
And how diverse does your organisation look now?
In terms of gender?
In terms of, non-white males.
Yeah, we haven't quite got to that one yet, Maxine. Nowhere near where it needs to be. Yep. Nowhere near where it needs to be in terms of disability, sexual orientation, cultural differences. It is a very, very homogenous industry.
Yeah, so you haven't got to any sort of kind of active recruitment around people from, you know, different ethnic groupings?
Certainly Indigenous people in all of the countries that we operate, that's definitely a focus, but not more widely than that.
Okay. Sarah, tell us. Sarah, tell us about your organisation in terms of
so much
fit.
Michelle's presentation resonated for me, and I don't want to compare myself to Meghan Markle, but maybe I could put in context where I sit in Ericsson. So my role was newly created in the middle of last year, heading up innovation for the Australian New Zealand operations. I report to the CEO and sit on the local executive team. I'm one of only 2 women. I'm the only non-white person, as I find myself on this panel, just saying.
I'm mixed race.
I'm mixed race too, there you go. So, I'm the only person not over the age of 40. I am the only mother and primary carer. I'm the only person who works part-time or ever has, and I'm the only single parent. So
how did they come to make you head of
Exactly, I'm totally breaking all the rules. But, you know, I'm nodding my head at you, Fiona, when you're saying how key flexible working is as an enabler. I would not be in the position that I'm in if I wasn't afforded the opportunity to have a career-worthy role as a part-timer. And there is so much more that can be done because I do the double shift. I do the double shift as a mother and as a primary carer, and I think a lot of women, and it's a result of the gender stereotypes and norms in our society, find themselves in that position.
So what will keep you there, though?
Sorry?
What will keep you there?
So they can keep paying me well to work part-time because they recognise the value I can contribute, not because of my hours in the office or face time in front of people, but because of the outcomes that I produce. And also because they recognise that my interests outside of Ericsson enhance actually how I perform in my job at Ericsson.
Okay. Just before we move on to Stig, just there's 2 stories we've heard here, Michelle, suggest to me. See, I look at your slides. I thought they were terrific, your whole story there. But I'm thinking, I looked at these slides 30 years ago because I belong to the Paleolithic age of feminism. Right. We have got many more women into these. 30%. 30% is not 50%, but 30% is a hell of a lot better than you were where you were 10, even 20 years ago. But these numbers are not changing, these organisations.
Yeah, and I think it's that stagnation that's the issue. And what we see actually is that we get the most change where you have legislative change. So in terms of gender equality, for example, when you had women's right to vote, massive change. You know, when we had gender equality acts across the world, that's where you get change. When you have sort of equal pay sort of things, that's where things change.
I was going to say, if I can just read it, the one thing we've got now in Australia is now the required pay audit.
Exactly.
So companies over a certain size have to publicly say who is paid what.
Yeah.
Is that a kind of circuit breaker?
I mean, I think it's one of them. And the thing is that that's where you get change when you have legislative change. It's the things you can't legislate against. You can't legislate against unconscious bias or stereotypes or norms. You can't, well, I was going to say you can't force people to take equal childcare sort of arrangements at home, although Scandinavia is doing a pretty good job at nudging that at least, rather than, you know, but they have legislative change that makes that possible. And I think in some ways we do have to make big policy decisions and not just let it happen. Because in some ways, if we let it happen, we'll just get this slow, slide back, slow. We'll be here for another 100 years. And frankly, I'm not willing to wait.
Steve, tell us the SBS story.
Well, I guess we're probably a little bit different in that for quite a long time, we weren't really paying a lot of attention to this. In fact, you know, we'd always assumed that diversity and inclusion is kind of who we are, it's in our DNA, it's sort of our purpose in our charter in terms of the Australian societal context. So we said, oh, we probably should pay some attention to this. Let's actually start looking at it. And we measured it for the first time to actually understand what was our sort of demographic makeup. And we were really delighted and surprised, but not necessarily unexpectedly so, to find that in every way we smashed it out of the water. So our leadership, our top 100 leaders are 51% female, 49% male. That goes all the way up to our board, to our executive and our board. That split is pretty much even all the way through. The same with all the other demographic measures that you expect to look at. They're either matching what you'd expect in terms of representation in society or exceeding them, with the exception of one, which was around disability. So that's one area that we know that we haven't got the right number yet. But the interesting thing for us was then we went back and actually asked our employees around inclusion and said, you know, we've got this great split, we've got these great results. And what we found in particular in the gender equity piece is interesting because we've got this great representation of women in our workforce, and yet half of them say they don't necessarily feel that it's an inclusive place to work. And when we delve a bit deeper, it comes back to a lot of the same issues that we're talking about here around workplace flexibility, work-life balance, you know, that sense of making the decision that to opt out and all those sort of things are coming into play. So I guess the lesson from us was you can have the great diversity metrics, but if you don't actually have the inclusion piece of the pie in place, and that goes completely to the fit and belonging question.
So how are you trying to address that?
So some of the things that we're starting to do is really starting to shift the focus away. We're not going to have hard measures or metrics on diversity stats. We're saying that they're important, we still want to have them, but they're becoming more like a soft measure, a guide to keep us on track. And really starting to say, if we put the inclusion lens on these things and actually allow that to guide us in terms of what we should be focusing on. You know, the gender equity piece is a really good example. So recently we were forming employee advocacy groups because it's not something we've had before. We never thought we needed it, but we thought this suggests perhaps we need to look at this. So we decided to form an employee advocacy group for a number of areas, and we allowed staff to organically sort of create these groups themselves rather than us sort of directing them how to do this. And we did it particularly because we wanted to avoid what we saw were some pitfalls in other big organisations that had created these employee advocacy groups, but then in fact became very exclusive. These groups became very exclusive within the organisations, and they were there meant to be driving this inclusion, but in fact they were becoming quite segregated. So the gender equality group was a really good example. Our employees, in particular our female employees, wanted this to be a women's group. They wanted it to be a women's group.
An exclusive group.
But they
Not an
saw
inclusive
that
group.
as absolutely necessary. We are here, we need to move the needle on these issues. It's about women, we have to make it about women, we need a women's group. Us working with them was really trying to educate, an educational process of saying, it's not that we don't want to focus on women, but it's not just about women. It's about gender equality and how do we address imbalances and remove barriers to gender equality, and that's something that doesn't belong to the women and not a women's group, but a group that belongs to all our employees, and everybody has to be engaged with it, and everybody has to play their part. And so that's quite a bit of a mind shift for a lot of people. So that's one of the things that we're absolutely...
Okay. I've just got to ask before we go on to Charles. Do you avoid, with your high-profile on-air talent, the Lisa Wilkinson, Carl Stefanovic problem? Does everyone know what I mean by that? She was getting paid about $400,000 less than him. And I know these are ridiculous salaries, but that's what it is. So do you avoid that?
Well, we do avoid that because if you watch SBS, some of our most high-profile talent are all women.
Yeah.
No. Does that... tricky answer. Do you have pay equity in your on-air talent?
Well, no, we
Will the contracts pass muster if they're on the front page of The Australian?
Absolutely.
Which is where they end up. Yep.
They absolutely would. But also, I guess it's a difficult one because we are quite heavy in terms of women talent. So it probably wouldn't be necessarily a fair comparison because if we look at some of our most high-paid talent on the network, and they're all female, they're all women. We've been quite a champion of making sure that.
It's not, what's that nice bloke that does the awards and the news, and I can't think of his name.
The bloke?
Yeah. There is. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, Anton Innes. Yeah.
Anton Innes, Anton, who is one of our newsreaders, but we've also got Janice Peterson, who is currently our newsreader, and Jenny Brocky, who's the host of Insight, and Lee Lin Chin, who is a celebrity in her own right.
He's been too long in Canberra, this guy.
But in fact, Maxine, it could be a pay gap the other way.
But yes.
Potentially.
Okay. Charles, let me come to you. What of Michelle's statements resonated with you, particularly this issues around fit and belong?
Yeah. Look, absolutely. In regards to fit, I found that slide with the Colonel Sanders lookalike man was a bit jarring. I could reflect on myself. Sometimes I look out across with the university, but the university's got some really good runs. We've got about almost 7 years of good programming, good strategy in advancing the Indigenous Australian Advancement Agenda. That's still a lot of work to do, but in that sense, recruitment, retention of students and staff, and success ratios, looking at Indigenous research output, teaching and learning, procurement, pretty much across the whole business around where we're up to. But I guess it's in a sense that it's kind of got in that, and it's an exciting time where we're at, because it's kind of got, it's got to be like business as usual, I suppose, around with it. And I think we've got our executive champions and we've got our ground champions, I suppose, and HR and those people that are mobilising it from the ground. But there's a whole middle section of our university that we've got a call to action. And I guess what it is about this whole thing of fit and where we're at, and I think this next evolution about how we reimagine Indigenous Australia is that we get beyond a question of why when we start to do this work. Why are we doing this? It just should be known. An exciting time in the sense of looking about space and place and about indigenising our campuses, and so that we can actually, our campus itself can reflect Aboriginal community. I think going on a learning journey together as well is a key component. Our workforce comprises around from our, obviously, and is reflective of our society, brings those views in as well. So it's that whole work that that underpins our success around reconciliation and moving towards this separate history to a shared history, a shift in consciousness in the way that we engage one another. And I think that this is the next level of sophistication where the university is going. And we've still got a lot of work to do in the sense of meeting targets, but I just think the targets, it's dry and it's old, and it doesn't get the change that you're after. It's about the hearts and minds and compelling people to to contribute, to participate, in a shared history and a shared sense of belonging. And I think that's an undercurrent. I think that is
my sense is that
we have.
it seems to me to be working, and I don't want to be patting ourselves too much on the back, but it seems to me at the university it's driven from every level, from the top and right the way. Do you think that's right?
Yeah, look, it is, absolutely. We've got strong executive leadership and leadership unfold. But I think, we had a bit of a chat about this before, I think the next piece of work, though, it is around the middle management. It is in that sense that everybody has to participate regardless around the position that you're in. And I think for us, a big focus group is around with our middle management, because it's the key decision makers in a lot of the work that we do. But I think it's just it's an exciting time that a lot of this work that we've got, they're not initiatives, they're not programs. It's just kind of, this is the way that we do business, and it's just the way that we, the way that we operate, which is, and it's taken time to get there, but we're in a good space, and I'm good too, because I'm excited about it, because I'm one of the gents that have to go around, and sometimes you can have an experience like you are when you're selling the Indigenous agenda, that you're a second-hand car salesman, peddling these wares to get out there. So it's good to come in it with a refreshed, renewed approach about how we're going to engage and address what we're trying to achieve at the university.
Okay. Michelle, can I take you into a slightly different area? Because there's been a lot of talk in the breakout sessions and this morning at this conference about disruption, innovation. And I would have thought that those people who are concerned about their identity and whether or not they fit into an organisation are actually not your disruptors. They are not the people who are going to take you to the new, discover it and all the rest of it. And Zuckerberg's a classic. He didn't fit in and created something entirely new that we didn't even know we needed, and now everyone's dependent on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's. So when I'm saying fit and belonging, I'm not saying that that women are sitting there with this massive desire to make friends with everyone and feel that they belong.
I'm suggesting it's part of a cultural fit, isn't it?
I mean, well, we can talk about
with the way things
does
are done.
Does he fit in? I mean, on the one hand, you say so he's a maverick that can go outside. I mean, on the other hand, when he looks out at who's at the top of tech in Silicon Valley, they all look like him. I mean, he's not that different. So, I mean, I think you can fit in and belong on all sorts of different dimensions, and innovation can happen on all sorts of different dimensions. So I'm not saying that a desire to fit in is a desire to just blend in. I think those are two different sorts of things. But it's a feeling of belonging, and that doesn't have to come from similarity. It can also come from feeling valued, and fitting in can be on the basis of looking like someone else, but it can also feel like, you know, you're adding something that there are people like you, and that might be in terms of values, it might be in terms of attitudes, it might be in terms of approach and things like that. So I wouldn't want people to take away the idea that there are people just aching to be the same as everyone else, and that's what we're aspiring to. I think it is feeling that you belong is different from saying you feel the same. And I'd want to make that distinction.
Maxine,
Anyone else?
sorry,
Yeah.
maybe I could add to it.
Yep.
Obviously, I work in the innovation space, and I described earlier all the ways in which I am different, and you might draw the conclusion that I don't belong. That's not actually how I feel at all.
Yeah.
And it goes to Stig, your point about inclusion. It's because I'm in an organisation where we have that culture and that environment where I feel included. I feel like I can bring my whole self to my job and to my work. And yes, certainly there are times where I think I'm on a different wavelength to all of my peers around me, like I don't know, like I just in a parallel universe or something like that. But I nevertheless feel valued enough, despite that, to feel I can bring the best of myself and do my best work. And I probably would have that reputation as being somebody who can be a bit disruptive, can actually make people feel a bit uncomfortable, make them squirm a bit because, yeah, so I don't know if that kind of goes to...
The dominant culture is uncomfortable around...
Still
I think you're
Drilling into my microphone.
Yeah, I'll just...
That's better. No,
Yeah.
hold it a bit closer.
That's great.
That's it.
Oh, good. Yeah, I was just going to say, it's that whole thing about with it around with the dominant culture. They're not comfortable if you don't fit. There is that real sense of angst around. I don't think that we've got a work culture that actually seeks and creates an environment where it wants you to fit, and it's not in the sense to be accepted but to fit into this because I can manage that, I can work that, I have controls around that.
I might even just say that, in answer to your question now that I've thought about it a little bit more, that the intervention that we came up with for the Royal College of Surgeons, which was part of that work that we did, so we don't just do the studies, we also then do the interventions. So what they had always done in terms of trying to get women to go ahead is to roll out the most successful surgeon they could find. And she's amazing. I mean, she's incredible. And they'd roll her out at conferences and say, look at her. She is amazing. And they said, but it doesn't work. And I said, yeah, of course it doesn't work.
Yeah.
You know, so partly, I mean, she is amazing, but she's also so inaccessible and scary that everyone goes, oh, there's no way I can be like that. So what we did was we came up, she's great though, but what we did was we came up with an intervention where what we did was we selected about 25 different role models from all different walks of life. Only about 60% women, 40% men, all different ages, backgrounds, racial. We had the gay one, we had the refugee, we had the, you know, it's not as cynical as that, but really we did that. And the message that we wanted to get across was not, look, women have made it in surgery, but look at the variety and diversity of people that have made it in surgery. And the message really was, all types of people can make it in surgery. I mean, not everyone can be a surgeon, but all types of things are valued. And we found, and what was really interesting about that is that we could show that to women and increase all of the things we wanted to increase. But we could also show it to ethnic minority groups. We could show it to LGBT people. We could show it, so suddenly it becomes this intervention that's all about saying all sorts of people fit in and belong here.
You've just triggered another thought when you talked about your surveys on the police force in the UK. And as we know, for years now, the Brits have been very good at producing very classy TV series which feature very prominent women in central roles, but very different sorts of women too. It's not just a cookie cutter type of, you know, female cop. I just wondered about, you know, that's role modelling that, you know...
I mean, fictitious role modelling, but role modelling nonetheless.
But I would have thought highly influential in terms of seeing women in authoritative. But has not had much flow over though?
Yeah, I mean, so we've got a number of very senior women already. So in MI5, in terms of the Met Office and in terms of those sorts of things. So absolutely that is coming through. Yeah. And some of those series are based on actual real senior women as well. Yeah. So, I mean, there is that thing that you can't be what you can't see. So, you know, and I think that's
exactly. I was going to say, again, to tell you another story from the dark ages. I mean, when I started as a trainee reporter, and there was one prominent female reporter in a national role, and that was Caroline Jones, who was in fact, she was at the very top. She was anchoring Four Corners in those days. But in the current affairs unit I joined, everybody was a bloke, except for the researcher, and she was referred to as the girl in the research office. Very, very different these days. Let me ask you about recruitment. How do you recruit for inclusion? Steve, do you want to have along inclusive lines? I should put it that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the challenge with this stuff is that and one of the reasons why we like to stay in the diversity side of things, measure and metrics, is the inclusion stuff is really hard. It's really, really tough, and there's things that we can do. I mean, one of the more obvious ones that is becoming more unpopular in terms of recruitment is, blind resumes, where we remove someone's name and date of birth.
Do you do that?
Gender. We don't, but it is something we're definitely considering.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the jury's out whether it works or not. So I think that's why we're not rushing to commit to doing something like that. I think the important thing in terms of recruiting for inclusion is making sure that your workplace culture is actually genuine, and therefore you can actually go out with a proposition to employees that actually says we are genuine about being inclusive and we are the kind of employer that you want to work for. I think that's far more effective than necessarily sort of going down the path of blind resumes.
Yeah, Sarah, what happens at Ericsson?
Yeah, so I think it goes to when we have conversations with prospective recruits, the conversation is more than just your pay, your job title, your job description. It is about what is Ericsson like as a place to work. I can talk firsthand about the 7 or 8 years that I've worked part-time. I've also done job share as well as part-time, about maternity leave, about the flexible work policies, about the collaborations that we have across the different intergenerational cohorts in the business around strategic projects, all manner of things which kind of go to what is this place really like to work, but also not shying away from the fact that we've got similar ratios of men and women in our business. In tech, it's not unusual, so we're sitting at about 19% women across the board. And it's not good enough, and our target is more modest. We're targeting 30% by 2020 globally, but it is, I would say, big recognition of the fact that we have such a diversity deficit, and that's the base that we're working from. But it is about being genuine and humble, actually, in saying that we have more we can do.
I think that inclusion piece is such a critical thing, that if you get that right, and I know that a lot of people struggle with it, people will come. People will come to you as an organisation if you are known as a place where you are genuine about inclusivity, that you're not just paying it lip service, and you're taking it to its fullest degree. I can give you a quick example. We understand that we have an issue around disability, representation for disability. And one of the things that was pointed out to us is that we are completely compliant in terms of accessibility and all those things in terms of our building. Something someone pointed out is you cannot go in the front door. So if you are someone who has a mobility or disability issue, you can't enter through the front door because the front door isn't set up to allow you through. It's got stairs and it's an old building, and but you can go through a different entrance and use a ramp or use a lift. But from an inclusive perspective, we were like, well, that's not right. We want every employee to be able to go through the front door. So that sounds simple, but in reality, looking at that going, this is a really complex problem. It's costly, it provides all sorts of problems for us. As a public broadcaster, we don't have a lot of money to do lots of these sorts of things, so we have to start to think creatively around some of this stuff.
Fiona, the recruitment question and these other things?
Sure, Maxine, I can probably share 3 really practical ways to reduce bias in recruitment, 3 really big moments of truth. The first one is how you actually design the job. So quite often when we're going to fill a role, we think, I'll just have another one of what I had before, which is usually someone that looks like me. And this conference is all about the future of work. Jobs are changing. So every single time you have a vacancy, you should think, what is it that I actually need? So deconstructing the job, boiling it right down to what are the attributes that I'm looking for, and then go and look for them in different places to where you would normally look. The second moment of truth is interviewing. Interviewing actually is useless. It's about a 30% correlation of successful hiring with interviewing, and yet we persist with it. So if we are going to persist with it, very important to have rigorous processes where at least 2 people are interviewing the same candidate, you ask the same questions, you use the same rating scale, and you have an objective conversation about that person's match to the attributes that you've decided that you need. That sounds so simple, and yet so often interviewing is not done, and there is so much bias in interviewing. And just another statistic for you.
Give us an example. What?
Oh, well, you'll just, you'll get someone I'll interview you, for example, and I feel this rapport with you. We start talking about, our kids or whatever, and suddenly I'm nicer to you, I give you a bit more leeway, whereas someone else I might meet Stig for the first time, I don't really like the cut of his jacket, I just think they're a little bit more detached.
Oh, that's, yeah.
There is so much bias, confirmation bias, similarity bias in interviewing. It is one of the least successful ways to hire people. Much better is to get them to do a work task and assess how they actually go about doing that work task. And one other quick part of the recruitment process that you should all just stop doing immediately is reference checking.
Yeah.
So there is a 7% correlation between reference checking and successful hiring. I mean, as if you're going to give a referee who's going to say anything other wonderful things about you. And then the third moment of truth in the recruitment process to mitigate bias is don't ever ask the candidate what their current salary is, because it's completely irrelevant. I know in the public sector you all do this anyway, you see what is she talking about? But in the private sector, there's this whole dance around what's the salary, how much should I say I want, this whole negotiation. So one of the things we're looking to do at BHP is to move to what we call blind salary recruiting, where you just do not ask the candidate their current salary. You pin the salary to the sort of person that you need in the job, not to the individual. Because we all know that women are coming off a lower salary, hence the 20% pay gap, and they're more likely to be less bolshy in terms of their negotiation. So 3 really practical steps of things that I think all organisations.
Has your organisation considered, given it's so male-dominated, female-only recruiting for a year, 2 years?
Well, it's against the law to do that. So in order to do that, you have to achieve a special exemption, which you can do. And I, in my previous organisation at ANZ, we did do that. I'm not a big fan of it, Maxine, because actually what we want to do is not make decisions based on gender alone or any kind of attribute. We actually want to have an inclusive process that's free of bias that gets the right person for the job. Having said that, the reality is we have a deficit, right, in terms of the number of women. So what we do mandate is gender-balanced candidate lists. You have to interview, make sure you've got, at least a 50-50 split there. But I think that having jobs that are only available for women is a bit of a last. Well,
I know of certainly one mid-tier wealth management firm in Canberra. It's a global firm. They're doing that right now for a period of 2 years, I think. I think I'm right in saying that the maths department here is doing that in terms of appointments in a bid to kind of boost numbers.
Yeah, I mean, just to go back to the other conversation before about government policy, that's a really practical way that governments could actually assist through changing legislation so that companies don't have to jump through hoops to get special exemptions. Because it takes all of us in HR departments many months to get approval to do stuff like that, because those sorts of strategies can be very, very helpful.
Yeah. I'll come out to the audience in just a moment, but again, I was intrigued, Michelle, by your point where you ended on the gender stereotyping being more concentrated among millennials, and of course that triggered a thing that still perplexes me, and that's young women who marry these days are tending more and more to take their husband's name, which was just something unheard of, 20 years ago. So that suggested that's both conservative and a sort of a reversion to a more conventional, traditional view of marriage, linked with their views about the workplace.
Yeah, and I think it is that it is part of this thing that progress is not always, a one-way street, that it goes forward and back. And I think it is this idea that they think that we've made so much progress that they no longer have a point to prove, So, and, it is a little bit of the whole hipster, traditional, going back to way things were and those sorts of things. So I think it is interesting. I mean, they're even still getting married. I mean, so I'm baffled. But,
It's the new.
I know. So maybe that says more about me than about them. But I do think it's interesting, and I do think it is along this idea that I think they saw generations before pushing and changing and doing these things, and they think that work has been done and they no longer have to do that. I think they're in for a
when
rude
I
shock.
when I ask my young friends, I get all these sort of things. They go, "Well, it's so impractical. You know, who wants all those hyphenated names? You know, and all that sort of stuff." Anyway.
I know, Michelle, in your speech you were talking about Sheryl Sandberg, but one quote I don't mind of hers and that I do pass on to younger women if they ever ask is that Sheryl Sandberg's quoted as saying, the most important decision a woman can make in her career is deciding who to marry. And it's because of the stereotypes around the unpaid work, around caring, around stepping out of the workforce and having time away from your career, etc.
Choose your husband wisely. Well, Jane Austen said it first, of course. Thank you all very much. It's been a terrific discussion. Please show your appreciation for our panel.